All right, so this is the last chapter in this semester, also the last chapter in the book, Western Civ Chapter 30. There's a couple of things that I want to go over this week, and they kind of revolve around the same thing, which I think that we've got to go over. However, it makes me worried that this is a very American centric chapter. I think that it's right. However, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around is that my own bias, or is this really true? I think it gives enough of the sources and examples to be true. Just as I've taken a look at it this week, I keep wondering if maybe this isn't the best chapter to end on it. Maybe we should have ended last week. But anyway, regardless, I think that the idea of wrapping up the last chapter with European culture and kind of where we're going now gives us a good ending point. There are some things missing, and we'll talk about those in just a second. Next week, we'll have the final. I'll put up a final study guide video, which will be longer, similar to our last study guide video, which will give you some hypothetical questions and kind of run through what it is that I'm looking for when we're talking about examples, context, significance, some of those things. Anyway, so we'll get started here and run through some of these themes. One of the biggest themes I think that we see in this chapter is the Americanization of Europe. There's a lot of things going on, but really with the Marshall Plan and military bases all over Europe, NATO, you're starting to see a lot of Americans in Europe, and who are not just they're vacationing. I mean, they're living there, living in Germany, living in Turkey, living throughout Europe in these bases, and so you're getting a lot more American culture, which is starting to infiltrate European society and culture. There is a large concern, and you'll read this in this chapter. There's a large concern from Europeans who are not happy with this cultural shift. Given some of the ideas that are going on, and we'll run through several of these. These are definitely things that I would want you to be able to put down on a test question, or at least talk about two or three of them and how they affect European society. Okay, there are corporate brands which are have branches, European branches, which is why Europeans are not happy. It seems like that Americans, or at least more American corporations, are taking over Europe. McDonald's, Starbucks, Apple, Gap, several of these that are coming in and taking over and changing the way that society and culture is in Europe. Okay. Now, if any of you have been to Europe, you know that there's a definite Europeanness to some of these stores, especially at McDonald's. You find different food on their menu. However, a lot of it is similar or the same as here, and that's getting away from French culture, German culture, British culture. And so Europeans are not happy with the infiltration of American culture on European culture. Okay, we start to see American clothing in Europe. We start to see American liquor and distilleries growing up in Europe. What this leads to is this idea of, not this idea, but really malls popping up where there used to be European markets. Now, if any of you have been to Europe, you will know that Europe has this pride in their marketplace. And so to see an American mall really spring up over the top of one of these markets, I think for an older demographic would be difficult to watch as you start to see the Americanization of a block or of your market or wherever it's springing up at. Okay, television programs start to really embed themselves in European culture. European children are watching American TV, cartoons, sitcoms, things of that nature, and so you get a lot of people who are looking at Americanized culture and saying, well, this is not the way that we want our children raised. We want them to be European, not American. But this is definitely something that we see globally, in Asia, in Africa, in all over Europe. This is not just happening in Europe. This is happening all over. Okay, um, music. Music is another big one. You're starting to see rock and rap music, which is American, really going around the globe, and people are starting to listen to this music. They're starting to uh, imitate this music, and so I love music. I find it fascinating that you get these melding of the two, and so you get British rock and roll or British rap, Irish rock, Irish rap, things like that, which are fascinating. And so I find it fascinating, but I do think that as Europeans, you're saying, well, wait, why are you melding this culture? Which I think ultimately leads to a melding of cultures, uh, which we could argue either has its own uniqueness, or maybe has taken on a new perspective. So, lastly, with the Americanization of Europe, we definitely see American English taking over as most countries do business in American English. Most most Europeans are learning American English, and so this is something that they're having to deal with, as not just learning their own language, but now they're really having to take on this second language, which isn't a big deal in Europe. There was always a lot of different languages, uh, but American English being the major focus is interesting. I think a lot of people are not happy with that, as you'll read this week. You get the technological revolution, which happens in Europe, just like it happens in the United States. This leads to technological advances that lead us to a lot better healthcare, better jobs. It connects us globally, and that's interesting. I think in a new way, and you'll read that this week as well. With the technological revolution, though, the economy slowed in Europe. However, Europeans continue to have one of the highest standards of living, and I find that fascinating that they continue even through this technological revolution. The economy slows, but that they're still able to live this higher standard, which a lot of younger countries aren't able to do. Okay, I need to make a point to tell you that this higher standard of living is outside the communist countries. Communist countries are not seeing this high standard of living, and their technological revolution is slower. We don't really, where we see the technological revolution in communist countries is really in China. That is exploding. However, the people at the bottom are still at the bottom. And this has been an issue that we've seen throughout 101 and 102 is people at the bottom are going to stay at the bottom and people at the top are going to continue to rise. There are people in the middle who are able to move between those classes. Okay, but there are some things that this book isn't going to talk about. We see that the EU is at a crossroads at the end of this chapter, at the end of the book. However, we know that the EU is disbanding, or at least the English or Britain exiting, or rather Brexit is happening, and the EU is not at a crossroads, but rather is trying to define what it's going to be moving forward. That's something that this book doesn't get because this is an older edition, and we'll see how historians look at that in the next 10 to 15 years and how that looks. Okay. Lastly, Europe no longer dominates the global scene. Okay. After World War II, you see the demise of Europe as a global superpower. And we talked about this last week, but one of the things that I want you to be able to see is that Europe's only is only one player on the global scene or the global stage. It used to be that the sun never set, on the English Empire, that is no longer the case. And as we move through, and you see different European countries are now vying for a piece of the global pie. However, you have the United States, China, who are major players continuing to do that. One of the things that I hope you're able to see this week and can maybe speak to in the final in depth is the individual states look globally for ways to organize societies and governments. No longer are we looking to the United States as the sole democratic power. No longer are we looking to the Soviet Union as the sole communist power. We're looking at, could we merge these political theories together, and how would it work best for us? And a lot of different states are looking across the world globally at how they can do that. And that ends where we're at today. I mean, that really puts us at where we're at, and different countries trying to come to grips with who they are, what their identity is, and how they're going to move forward, along with this back history of being Prussian, being Syrian, being part of the Ottoman Empire, right? I mean, these are things that continue to work, but also trying to find, hey, we're our own state, and how do we move forward? I hope you guys saw that. I hope that you can see a lot of the different tensions and really the complexity of the topics that we've talked about this semester. I'll put together a study guide for next week. We'll talk more in depth about some of these things. It'll probably be 30 minutes. And I'm sorry about that if it's a little long for you, but also put up a study guide. I hope you have a great week. If you have anything or any questions or anything you want to talk about, reach out to me. I'm always available. We'll talk to you later.